Okay, this is the video to accompany your notes on the sun, Unit 2, the sun. Your notes in your DIN look like this. It's this page right here. That would be slide 4 of your DIN. Notice it has a pencil and a green check, which means you're going to do it and then check yourself. This side over here you'll do after we take the notes, once it's assigned, and it has a red pen to it, so you're going to have that one graded. So you can look for that assignment in your Google Classroom. So back to the notes. The sun produces a lot of energy. It can produce light energy and heat energy. We're going to talk about both of those today. So you do need to remember your essential question, which is, why is it important that the sun uses a nuclear reaction? So before we can talk about anything, we need to talk about bonds. Bonds are something that happens between two chemicals, and there's lots of different types of bonds. The two different types of bonds that we're going to talk about are nuclear bonds and bonds between atoms. If we're talking about just regular atoms going together, fusing together, forming a bond, they have very weak bonds that are easy to break. And they store and release very little energy. But that leads us to a discussion of, what does it mean, store and release? Let me show you. So when bonds are formed, they store energy. It's kind of like if you have a bank account, a savings account. When you make the deposit, it stores the energy. When you make a withdrawal, it breaks the deposit and releases the energy. So when bonds are made, bonds are formed, energy is stored. Now you're going to need to know this because you're going to need to know it in biology as well. So when bonds are formed, energy is stored. And when bonds are broken, energy is released. The best equation I can possibly think of for that, you'll also see it when you do biology next year, is when you have carbon dioxide added to water in plants, and you go through photosynthesis, and it takes that carbon, and it takes the water, the plant does, and reconfigures it to make sugar. And sugar is C6H12O6. It also produces a byproduct called oxygen for us, so that we can have it to breathe. Now, the thing that's left out of this equation is the sun. So here's your sun. Here's the sun's rays. So the sunlight causes the plant to go through photosynthesis and thus creating sugar. So it forms sugar. If it's formed, the energy from the sun is stored here. So we're storing the energy from the sun in sugar. So if you have, give another one because this got too full. So if you have let's say you're here, right here. Here you are. There are your hands. You are a heterotroph. This is totally an aside, but you will see this next year in biology. So here's your heterotroph. It could be you, it could be a cow, it could be whatever. That looks like a 5-year-old drew it. And here's a tree. Say we could just use a tree or a flower or whatever. So this is an autotroph. It means it makes its own food. Autotrophs make their own food. You've probably heard that before. So we produce as a byproduct carbon dioxide gas and water. Plants use carbon dioxide gas and water to make sugar and oxygen. We use sugar and oxygen for energy. So we're going to break this down. Remember, the energy is stored in these bonds, so it's stored here when it's made, and over here it's released when the bonds are broken. So when you break down sugars in your body, you're releasing energy that was stored there from the sun. Over here, you take that sugar and you have released it. When you broke the bonds, you release the energy and you release the carbon dioxide in the water. And here you're going to store that energy in the bonds of glucose when it's made through photosynthesis. So hopefully you understand this with stored and released. That's the big important part right there, is stored and released. When the bonds are formed, it's stored. And when the bonds are broken, it's released. And again, we're talking about bonds, bonds, bonds. So going back to our bonds notes, nuclear bonds are a different type of bond. They are very, very strong. And because they are so strong, those bonds store a lot of energy. And that energy that's stored, because it's in a nuclear bond, that's very hard to break. But when it is broken, that energy that is stored was released. So if you break that bond, you're going to release that energy. If it's a strong bond, it releases a lot of energy. If it's a weak bond, like bond between atoms, it produces a little bit of energy. Now, another type of reaction, remember we said that the sun releases heat and energy and light. So let's talk about combustion. Combustion is when you break and reform bonds between atoms, usually a hydrocarbon. A hydrocarbon is something that has a carbon and a hydrogen, and I'm going to show you that. This releases energy. So if you're going to burn a hydrocarbon like gasoline or wood, peat moss, coal, any of that, if you're going to burn those, you're going to produce some energy and some heat. So like we said, if we burn a hydrocarbon in a combustion reaction, we're going to get some energy released, we're going to get some heat released, carbon dioxide and water. Let me show you what that looks like. Let's say we have a hydrocarbon, that's CH4. That's like methane. Methane looks like this. It's a gas, but here's what it looks like chemically. It's a carbon with 1, 2, 3, 4 hydrogens. So it's called a hydrocarbon. Hydrocarbon because of hydrogen and carbon. So if we take this hydrocarbon, it could be wood, it could be methane, it could be propane, which would look a little bit different, but still has carbon and hydrogen. It could be methanol, ethanol, peat moss, any of your carbon-based fuel sources added to oxygen gas, because you have to have oxygen gas for a fire to burn. That's going to produce carbon dioxide gas and water vapor, which is essentially a gas. So this is a gas, and this is a gas, this is a gas, and this is pretty much a gas, essentially. So when you burn a hydrocarbon, one of the major things you're going to get is heat. Heat is going to be released. Why would you burn coal? To release heat. Why would you burn propane? To release heat, to cook your steak with or whatever. So this is a combustion reaction where you're going to take a hydrocarbon and oxygen and produce heat from it. Now the sun does not use this reaction. It uses other reactions that are nuclear. Let's talk about those. That's what the next slide is on. I would like for you to write the notes down that I put on the whiteboard somewhere in your notes, or you could take a screenshot of it if it's not too messy. So let's talk about what are nuclear reactions, not combustion, but nuclear reactions. Nuclear reactions are where you're either putting together or breaking apart nuclear bonds. Remember, putting together stores energy. Breaking apart releases energy. There are two types of nuclear reactions. There's fission and fusion. We're going to talk about fission first. Fission is when you split the nucleus of an atom. You split the nucleus of an atom. So you bombard the nucleus of the atom of uranium-235 with neutrons. So you bombard that uranium with neutrons, and it splits open. It splits it open. Splits it open, just like this. You've got your nuclear product and energy. That's the biggie. That's the biggie right there, is energy. It's going to make heat energy and light energy with some extra neutrons that are just thrown in there as waste. So again, the neutron bombards the uranium-235. It produces lots of different nuclear products, nuclear side effects, and then you've got your heat and light that's produced. Now, you don't get so much light when we're talking about nuclear reactors, like nuclear power plants, but the sun does get a lot of light. So that's fission. So that's fission. Let's talk about fusion. Fusion is when two atoms are fused together. So if you have two hydrogen atoms, they fuse together to make a helium atom. You may not understand exactly what that means, what that would look like, so let me explain. I'm going to draw it over again for you guys. Okay, so if we're talking about hydrogen, hydrogen is H2. Its mass is 2, its number is 1. So hydrogen has a nucleus right here that has 1 proton. Sorry, its mass is 1, not 2. That was off the top of my head. I didn't have to look it up. So mass is 1 is numbers 1. So we're going to have 0 neutrons. There are other versions of hydrogen that have higher masses, but they have a heavier nucleus. But we're not going to talk about those per se. They are deuterium and tritium if you need to look those up, but they work the same way. So you have your 1 electron on the outside. Here's your energy level. You've got, whoa, that was really pretty. And then you've got your electron right there. So if we have 2 of those, I can make this a little bit neater. And P plus is your abbreviation for proton, and N0 is your abbreviation for neutron. Here's your energy level, your 1 electron. If you fuse those together, fuse those together, you're going to get a helium. A helium has a mass of 4 and a number of 2. So here's the nucleus for helium. Oh, I drew that much better. Much, much better. So you're going to have 2 protons, 2 neutrons, and 2 electrons. There's 1, 2. See, there's 1, right here, 1, 2. So when you fuse these 2 things together, it makes helium and stores a lot of energy, which is going to be broken apart when those bonds are broken in fusion and fission, which happens constantly in the sun. So here's your little diagram that I was talking about, tritium and deuterium. Deuterium is here. It's a version of hydrogen, and it fuses together with tritium, which is a version of hydrogen, and that fusion produces energy and helium and some neutrons as waste. So let's talk about what else is produced. There's various types of light that's produced when you go through fusion and fission, and those lights that light is called electromagnetic waves. And it's not just light, it could be other things like X-rays and gamma rays and things like that. But that is also the next thing we're going to talk about. So I'm going to end this video here, and we're going to start another video on this slide, on this section of your DIN. This is about the electromagnetic spectrum. Rainbows, it's awesome. So come back.